And we'd like to review this episode, and we have two new people who have also seen this episode with us. So, over to Jeff to give us an outline of the episode.
All right, so the way we normally do this, after I read the initial stuff, I turn it over to Ben, and I'll probably do that again. But after that, we can feel free to have the other two chime in wherever you want to. So anyway, this is Homicide: Life on the Street, Season 7, Episode 3, which is called Just an Old-Fashioned Love Song, which is a Three Dog Night song, in case anybody didn't get that reference. And it originally aired October 23rd, 1998 on NBC. Was written by Eric Overmyer and directed by Leslie Libman and Larry Williams. And that directing team has showed up before. And David B226 Morris on TV.com gave up apparently sometime in the 6th season, so we don't have a lengthy review from him. But I can read this episode summary, and then we'll go from there. So Ballard and Mike Giardello investigate a double shooting at the home of a prominent sports doctor and his wife, a dermatologist. The doctor who was wounded did not realize the deceased, thought to be a prowler, was actually his sister-in-law. Meanwhile, Munch contends with the IRS. His waterfront partners want him to make sure that his cousin, their accountant, has been paying their taxes. The waterfront needs a loan to pay for some improvements. Gardy has taken personal day to take care of matters like his recent separation from his wife, Flora. Munch has his hearing with the IRS. He owes $30,000 in back taxes. Bayless and Shepard discuss sexuality and the possibility of a date. Falzone takes Mike and Ballard to meet an old fight man who knew their doctor. Ballard becomes excited while watching Falzone spar in the ring. Mike and Ballard's investigation lead them right back to the doctor's house, where his wife may be guilty of conspiracy to commit homicide. Gardy stops by the waterfront to check on Billy Lou's availability. So that's a brief recap. So what'd you think, Ben?
Oh, dear me. This is one of these episodes I'd give about 6 out of 10 to. The reason why is it's a lot of the stuff with like the personal lives of the characters, and it's like all these people like asking Renee out, and it just seems a little bit like sort of like uninteresting to me. It's like a little bit maybe like high school kind of stuff. And it's not, and it doesn't really grab me, and it sort of like gets the attention away from things. The actual story is it gets more interesting as it goes along, where Ballard finds out things about the case. But so it gets better in about the last 20 minutes, but it's difficult to know how to describe it. I think Andrew watched it. I think he liked it, and he's also watched The Wire. If he wants to put his mic on, and if he's not,
yeah.
What did you think about it, Andrew?
Just the whole episode, or
well, everything. If you want to talk, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, I kind of agree with you. This is the first episode I've seen from this show. I did like it, but I did feel that some of the interpersonal communication about relationships I didn't relate to as much. But I did like the characters who I think pursue, like, the comedy was interesting in the references, and not as much, I guess, comedy, but some of the references were interesting. I wrote down Dark Victory with Betty Davis. I think Dante's Inferno was a reference that was used about the IRS. I think he said the innermost or like circle of hell. But I found that interesting, the dynamics between the characters with their comedic relief, but I like the realism of the show a lot. In a way, it related to The Wire for me. That sense of there wasn't anything that really glorified the detectives. It kind of placed them in their humanness, and I really liked that aspect of it. It seemed kind of gritty and just true to life from what I could tell. But those were my general, I guess, observations of it.
Does The Wire actually? I mean, we could actually say that Law and Order does actually operate within the same fictional universe as Homicide because of the crossover episodes. So, Jeff, does The Wire actually operate within the same universe? Have any characters gone over to it?
I don't think so. No, actors have. There have been some actors who were on Homicide that were also on The Wire, but I don't think they used any of the same character names. And in fact, they actually. Well, actually, I take that back. Munch might have been on it because he's on like everything.
So it's the Munch
world, crossed over
Munch
to so
universe.
many shows. But the thing I remember reading about The Wire was that the character that the real guy that Munch was based on, there's also like he's on The Wire, and so they had that character, just not as Munch. They had him as his real, more like his real self, I guess you could say. So it's less Belzer and more the actual detective who was a sergeant in Baltimore Homicide. So, so I know he was on there. I remember that because they talked about like the similarities between and differences between him and Munch. But I haven't actually watched The Wire, so I don't know the details of it. But I started to say yes because I remembered that Lewis had showed up, but then I remember that wasn't actually on The Wire. That was on Law and Order SVU because when Belzer left that show, they had Munch retire, and he had like some kind of retirement party, and Lewis showed up to that.
Huh.
So that's still the Law and Order / Homicide universe, though.
Right. So we know that Lewis doesn't get killed. Right. Andrew, have you read or listened to David Simon's book, Homicide? What was it called, Jeff? Because you've listened to it. Is it A Night in the Killing Spree, something like that?
A Year on the Killing Streets is what it's called.
I have it.
Because David Simon spent a year with, in reporting on writing the book from his experience as a year on the homicide unit. But when they made the TV show, they decided A Year on the Killing Streets was not a good title.
It would be for HBO.
Yeah,
it would be for HBO.
More than a year, and two because it sounded it already had homicide in the name, so they were like, I need to have something uplifting like Life on the Street,
Yeah, but these days though, it's like I think like you want to like nail it a bit more, like it's really this sort of thing because it's like a bit more of a niche audience.
Well, yeah, and from the very first episode, they were always sort of taking shots at the network, and the network deciding to call it Life on the Street. They put a line for Lewis in the very first episode where he says, "This job's got nothing to do with life."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I just wish more episodes could. I mean, and there was
I knew Ben was going to get a picture of that chick at the firing range as soon as I showed her.
Yeah, well, she's got some nice hips on her.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I was like, as soon as I saw her, I knew Ben would have a pic of her.
Usually, there's not that much to grab in these episodes, so Shannon Worry wasn't needed for this one.
Yeah, she could have played that the part of the firing range woman.
I think I'm interested.
Yeah, I kind of liked Lemonhead too. He's just trying to get his dome done.
Yep. I can relate to that, unfortunately. So, Andrew, did you say that you have the book?
No,
you haven't.
I haven't. I haven't read.
Right. Right. I mean, you might like it because it might touch on things.
Oh,
do you think he'd like it, Jeff? Given that he likes The Wire. Although you've not seen The Wire, so it's difficult to know.
Yeah, well, another thing, now I can't remember if it was a series or just like a movie or miniseries. Anyway, they did another one called The Corner that was based on the David Simon book, also called The Corner, and they referenced it actually in the season finale of season 6 of Homicide. He was talking, that Frank and Tim are having the conversation in the car about how this book came out about. And so, of course, they have the in joke about, you think anybody would ever write a book about homicide? And Frank was like, Nah. So, yeah.
I mean, I thought it was. I think they're starting to work out how to write Laura Ballard, but it's almost as if they don't quite. Do you think that, Jeff, that they didn't quite, where the potential of the actress, because the actress is good, and there's things that there's like her little reactions to things that they could have got a lot more out of her.
No. Oh, sure.
I got everything as I was standing back up.
They could have, yeah, they could have explored, more of her personality than they did. But honestly, like, I would have been fine with them not delving much more into her if they gave more screen time to, like, Munch, for instance.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing. The last couple of seasons is that they spent maybe a little too much time on the new characters, but even then, they still didn't really flesh them out as well as they could have. So, but on the one hand, I can sort of see that maybe kind of the point is they kind of are like, well, this is this window into these people, but you kind of see how they interact and the things they say on the job. But they didn't do a whole lot of exploring of anybody's personal life outside the job. There's a little bit of it, but it never was the focus of the show. It's sort of like a scale you could put on and say, like, Law and Order would be on the end of hardly ever talking about the characters' personal lives. It's almost entirely just job related. Follow this one case. And then the opposite, would be like NYPD Blue or Hill Street Blues or something, where they focused a lot on the personal lives of the cops and not as much about the job, although they spent plenty of time on it. But there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. So Homicide's somewhere in between. I remember Jerry Orbach talking about how he enjoyed the crossover episodes. Played Lenny on Law and Order. He enjoyed doing the Homicide because he got to actually talk more about stuff outside of the exact case while he was on Homicide. He got to have the conversations with Munch about the former girlfriend, wife they had in common and that kind of stuff. So he enjoyed that, and whereas on Law and Order he didn't get to do it as much. But it still wasn't okay, we're gonna follow Ballard home and see everything she does in a day or something like that. They didn't really cover that a whole lot.
Yeah, oh yes, they did point. Oh, that was it. I made some notes. Yes, she actually pointed out, because they had Little G actually point out Ballard's, because I've always said that she has these kind of the way she acts like when she fancies a guy. And they had Giardello, the Little G, saying something like that. They're saying you could hear the way she was looking at Falzone when he was in the boxing ring, and he was saying that you could be arrested in some states for giving a look, and because she always she sort of preens her hair when she really fancies a guy. It's the same kind of body language and gestures that she's done twice before, so she's pretty obvious when she likes a guy.
But of course, in that situation, if I'm saying, would she be the same way if it was somebody else boxing? Is she more turned on by that than she is by the actual guy? Or is it really as much about him? So
that was interesting though, because they sort of and then and the way she played it though, that she was actually turned on by the actual. So that was a nice little contradiction there, because that's what makes characters more interesting, is when they have a contradiction. That's something I agree with Robert McKee about, that a character dimension is a contradiction. So, for instance, when if you have a character that can be cruel and kind, but in different situations and to different people, that makes them more interesting. And so dimension is a contradiction. I forgot that I made these notes. So, because it was a while ago since I watched it, because we had the delay over Thanksgiving. Oh yes, there was a bit that I thought about with Munch, because frequently conservatives will say that not that many people pay, that less than, not that many people pay federal income tax. And I was wondering, would a Baltimore cop earn enough to pay federal income tax?
Well, some, sure, especially someone like him that's single, so he's not like doesn't have deductions for dependents or whatever. And I'm thinking Munch probably isn't the type that makes a whole lot of charitable contributions. I don't know.
And then we can also have this thing that, I mean, like Falzone should have said, although, like, when people accuse him of being tight, and it's like, hey, I'm a divorced man and I'm paying alimony and I'm supporting a kid. There's a reason why I have to be a little bit tight on $30,000 a year. Then we got what we got.
Right, no, when looking through those pictures, and there's that one picture of Mike Giardello. I'm like, is Ben going to try to see if he can make every thumbnail for the reviews all season a picture of him? Because the first two are.
Well, I thought I'd put that in for the ladies, because he's in good condition.
Yeah. I was like, that right there, is that going to be the thumbnail? or
I don't know. I mean, it might be Lemonhead. I don't know. It might be Lemonhead there.
So, Bradley, you got something you want to talk about with this? Or chime in anytime.
I'll just do some lines and then I'll let you come in, Bradley.
Or not, no pressure.
I'll let you think about it. So there was some good lines from, there was Ballard and the nurse, and then nurse said, staying away from crustaceans, and Ballard say, at least the ones that can't buy me a drink. And then Little G said, Mary had other bookies, and the bookie said she was very promiscuous. And then and then I mentioned the For Hot You. So there were lots of nice little lines. Now, when I used to watch Doctor Who, I'm not going to talk about Doctor Who, but the point is, when I was like about 19, 20, I only used to watch things for the dialogue. And now my approach is, well, a good line only lasts a few seconds, and then you got to wait and wait and wait and wait for the next line. So it's like, I don't think dialogue is as important as I used to think it was. So maybe that was just me being more superficial when I was about 19 or 20. Is your attitude on... I'll ask Jeff if his attitude on that has changed, and then we can go over to what Bradley thinks. Is your attitude on that changed, Jeff, about like the importance of dialogue versus, like, say, characterization and story and other things? Have you sort of changed, like, your balance of what you appreciate?
I never really quantified any of that, I don't think. So it's hard for me to say. I mean, I guess I think I'm a little bit pickier when it comes to comedies now than I used to be. I mean, the bottom line with comedy has always been, if it makes me laugh, then it's good, if it does that consistently. But I think I used to give things a little bit more of a chance. Where I'd give it a little more time to make me laugh, and now there's already so many things I know are funny that if I see something new, I don't give it much time. If it hasn't made me laugh in a few minutes, it's not going to, so I give up on it quick. But drama's always been a little bit different, but I guess the similarities, it's sort of, there has to be something that kind of grabs me. It doesn't have to be some kind of action sequence, but if there's not action, then the characters, there needs to be something compelling about the characters pretty close to the beginning that makes me want to know what's going to happen to him next, or makes me relate to him in some way. It can't be going longer and longer with me being like, why am I caring about these people? So that was sometimes the struggle with Blake 7 when I was watching that, is the initial, when they sort of got the crew together, that was kind of better, but as it went on and they kind of introduced new characters and got rid of old ones, or some of that changed, and they would have sometimes long sequences with new characters, and I'm like, why am I watching this? Because I don't care about these people. There's nothing interesting.
Yeah, you want Jenna back.
Well, yeah, that would have been better. And even her, she wasn't very well developed, but as a character, they kept on changing their mind as to what they wanted her to be. So she was more of a plot convenience than a well-rounded character. But anyway, yeah. But
It was well developed in
that's
other areas.
yeah, but with drama, yeah, there has to be something that's compelling about it, that makes you go, oh, I want to know what's going to happen to these people next. Like, the characters are interesting, or the action is interesting in some way. There has to be something like that. It can't just be, well, trust us eventually. I mean, I tried recently with, I'm watching all this stuff from the 80s, and I was trying to watch the miniseries War and Remembrance. And it's got some good actors in it, but it's just so boring. I mean, after it's like, half an hour into part 3, and it's still like there's been maybe a total of 20 minutes that was really that interesting. It's like, man, it's just way too slow to develop. You gotta give me something by this point in the series. It's more than what they've shown. Because when you think about it, that's a mini series, but it's like 2 hours or 2.5 hours per episode. So by the time you get to part 3, you've already had the equivalent of like 5 episodes of a 1-hour drama show.
Yeah.
Haven't really gotten anything where you're like, oh, I really want to know what's going to happen to A, B, and C, and by that time, then you're just never going to get it.
Yeah, it's got to grab you before then. So Bradley, what do you think of the episode, or if you think there was anything raised in there about like a type point of view or anything, just anything you'd like to talk about with the episode?
Yeah, I mean, just going into it, I'd only seen I'd seen very little of the series before. I think I saw a Lone Other crossover, like two-part one, maybe 10 or 11 years ago. So that was a while ago. So I was just kind of like getting back into it, and I mean, the first thing that came to mind was the actors, since most of the procedural actors kind of move in similar circles. So most of the actors I've already seen before, of course, in various other programs. So the first thing that caught my eye was that just how they played, well, basically what I saw consistent in them with in this show with what I saw in other shows. So I had that simmering through my mind. And then as far as the story goes, and the way the show is built, I definitely like the interpersonal sharing a lot, and yeah, I definitely like the balance of like the actual detective work and the actual character development with. It's just to me, it's like a really good mix of the two, and so I'm still kind of processing what went on. So that's just my like very brief opinion of what to think of the show so far.
Cool.
Did you think there was like, because you might be aware, you're probably aware of this, Bradley, having come from the UK, and like just the aspect of like some things that you think are maybe class related, and some things that you might think are type related. Like, say a character like Falzone, where it's like he seems to be come like from maybe like a working class, tough background, where it's like acting like a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered if you look at it through the lens of that as well.
Yeah, basically how people respond to one another. I thought of it mostly in the from perspective of types or temperaments.
Right.
So yeah, I noticed to me my vague impression was like a bunch of SJs with like a sprinkle of SPs and like one NT, maybe two NTs, and no one else. That was my outgoing perspective. And then as far as class and sort of background goes, because typology is still relatively new to me, I was looking at through that lens.
Right.
And then class is I think because it's kind of a more diverse area, and there's so much sprinkles of lots of sprinkles of various. It's a very diverse cast in the sense of I guess ethnicity and like background and upbringing, and there's so many differences I feel between characters to where a lot of the I guess class or racial tension is very it's kind of a non-factor because everyone's so different.
It's one of the weird things about where Baltimore is, because it's in Maryland, which is like really part of the South, but the actual city is majority black, and certainly the areas there where they go to like South Baltimore will be more like the South, and they'll call it like hillbilly country. I wanted to call it Billy Town, something like that.
Yeah, Pigtown.
So, yeah. And so you can get these tensions and like contradictions that are interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw the sort of class divides, but I didn't pay that much attention, to be honest, because I was too busy on the temperament stuff.
My personal opinion is that you can see it where, like, if you have an SP from a working class background, they'll almost appear like more working class. They'll appear more, it will sort of maybe exaggerate their. What I sort of mean is, like, because of what SP is generally good at, like being good in a crisis and like being good under pressure, is like if they're from that sort of like poorer working class background, it's easier for them to survive than say other types. Like say it would be like it's harder for like an INFP or an INTP to survive on the streets because like what they're good at is not necessarily well matched to their environment.
Right. Exactly. I'd say there's a lot of truth to that. Is what certain types temperaments are good at. Definitely, this feels like the show feels like a very unfriendly, intuitive environment relative to what it would be to SJs and SPs. Are you just talking about like what it would be like to be in the show or on the streets, or
I suppose on the streets in that. So, for example, Victor Glencoe's INTP, and he lives in Ukraine. Ukraine's got a lot of, and he would say to me, like, you can see like the way he defines extroverted sensing is a little bit more biased towards like the Enneagram 8 kind of like the way any STP uses extroverted sensing in terms, and he sort of like, if you're in an area like Ukraine and there's a little bit more, you feel like there's a little bit more force being used. It's like, as an INTP, it's not.
Oh, okay.
Don't do well under that kind of like pressure, and whereas, so.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, it's just it's. I definitely feel very uncomfortable whenever I'm put in one of those situations where I'm expected to sort of have sensing prominence, to use a very crude term, and it's just I always kind of struggle to match the expectations of what's required of the environmental settings, and based on my own experience. But I think what comes to mind is I used to work at the Home Depot, and that's not an intuitive, friendly environment. So it was I definitely tried. Like I knew I had a job to do, and I tried to do it the best I could. But
what do you mean by that? Not an intuitive, friendly environment?
Oh, it's just it's not about carefully thought out processes. It's more about doing it. Instead of like having a well organized plan, just kind of like doing it instinctively and then doing it again, mostly to match the clientele, because most of the clientele are contractors and construction workers and that sort of they just come in to get what they want, and you're expected to like know what they want already, sort of sort of no nonsense, no nuance, just do the job. There's very little small talk, just kind of get it done, get them in, get them out. And then the actual company was it was definitely geared towards the customer. So you were prompted to take what the customer needs into account, and most of them just want their things and they want to get out.
Right.
And then the logistics of it was well, the only way to say is it's very get things done at any cost, really. Of course, there are any you expect to know all the rules and regulations, but a lot of those are often broken just to kind of get what needs to be done.
Right.
And then there's like the manual labor where basically I will say it's a somewhat sexist environment because like the women are serving as cashiers and as clerks, and they get on the phone and they call the man to take all the stuff out of the car and load it up.
But
so
what I would say about that, though, a lot of times men will be less aggressive with a woman on the phone.
Yeah.
So these companies might hire a woman because they don't. A guy will be like, won't necessarily argue with a woman as much as than if it was a man on the phone. And if it's Home Depot and like if it's heaving around heavy stuff, it's gonna go towards the stronger people. But trying to get it back to typology, we talked a little bit before about. I got into this by sort of saying that I did a little bit of a self-indulgent digression. Sorry, Chad. But we talked before about. Did you think there were any characters? Remember when we talked about there's hardly any NFs in Homicide, and maybe that was because. Did you think that the profession got in the way of it? That it was sort of like contradict their values or
yeah, well, I mean, I think it's NFs usually want to have jobs where they feel like they can make a difference and like change things for the better. And the homicide unit is not a place that you tend to be left with that feeling. It tends to like you be very, cynical kind of attitudes because it's like over every day you just see death and you see people. You deal with criminals and people killing people, and 80% of the time they don't even really seem to have much of a reason. Something. They talk about in this episode like love or money, but I mean, what we've seen from previous episodes is sometimes it's not even that reason. Sometimes it was just an unexplained act of aggression or whatever. They never find out really why somebody killed somebody. So if you're somebody that not only you want to make it, but you also want to know why. You care about exploring like the whys of people, like NFs tend to do, and ends in general. You don't get much satisfaction from this job because you're dealing with, a lot of stuff that does not have a happy solution or something positive coming out of it, and often you don't even know why something happened. You're just told that's not your job. Solve the case and move on.
Whereas if you had like maybe you had a drama about negotiators, like trying to calm people, get people down from a building from like committing suicide or
there's
hostage
a little
negotiators.
Bit more, I'm not I'm not saying there aren't some police jobs that some NFs could possibly do for a while, but they're limited because a lot of the job varies from doing boring paperwork to dealing with kind of depressing, not life-affirming type facts that keep being thrown at you, and the people that you deal with, are not interested in rehabilitation or getting anything out of it that you can feel like, oh, I'm really making a difference. I mean, there's a little bit of that with some people that become police officers. The idea of there's too much crime in my neighborhood, so I want to help like fight that. So they do have that kind of inclination. But then often the job itself, they kind of get bogged down in a lot of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with that. So that's why, like Bradley said, is it tends to be majority SJs, and then, like you said, some SPs. And the SPs kind of have to find something that they can sort of enjoy within the job, so they're not bothered by the tedium of it. So we talked about Pimbleton having the thing where his rush came from having somebody in the interrogation room in the box and really having to nab the guy for that. Falzone seems to kind of have this thing where he's all about proving himself. We talked about that before, where he's kind of like he wants to show that he's this not only tough dude but also smart and can figure things out and hang with everybody. He sort of has this like I can deal with whatever comes at me kind of attitude. And so we have the one intuitive type Munch who kind of just is like he's able to survive the job because he has that sort of proper amount of cynicism already from both life experience and his own kind of rationalization of things. But he's able to keep doing the job because it's like, he has other things that stimulate him, and he focuses on those things, and then just sort of goes along with what he has to do in his job. And because, as we've said, we think he's an ENTP, so as an extrovert, he enjoys being around the other people. It's sort of the camaraderie of the squad that he can kind of be the philosopher and spout off things about stuff like Dante's Inferno and stuff like that.
I really like the. I think I'm not sure if it wasn't the first scene, but I think the second scene when it went into the office, how the camera moved from the different characters and had each of them speaking, kind of like establishing who was in the show, sort of that worked in the office. I really like that, and I do like the interpersonal stuff. The thing that I said earlier, I guess I meant the romantic things, kind of like Ben was saying, the high school kind of.
Yeah.
Situations, but besides that, I really like the interpersonal dialogue and the different connections each character has. But I thought that was a good scene where it kind of moves from character to character in a very quick way, but you get a sketch of roles, I guess. So that was cool.
Yeah, this show was noted at the beginning for its camera work and kind of visual. The way that it was shot was different than a lot of shows at the time, and as the show went on, they toned down some of that stuff. They used to do more of it in the first season and have it a much more wobbly cam, and they would kind of repeat lines and things that have like shoot it from 3 different perspectives and then show each one right after the other and stuff. And they still do that occasionally in the later seasons, but a lot less than they did when they started it.
That happened as well on Battlestar Galactica, where it will start with, let's shoot it more like a dog. And eventually people just realize, there's a lot of people out there like me, it's like, they don't want too much shaky stuff because it can make them feel ill. It's like maybe it's those people that get like motion sickness and stuff.
Yeah, I think at the beginning the idea was to make it as similar as they could to kind of like what David Simon experienced when he was like, if it was like, I'm going to be in the back of the detectives as they're driving to a scene, or it was like, we're going to try to make you feel like you're the one in the back of the car going to the thing, and this is how it would be. And so it's not going to be you're going to have this perfect steady camera the whole time. But yes, it can be a little too much sometimes.
Yeah. And that was how they would shoot a lot of the car scenes. Would be like, from the point of view is like if you were a passenger in the back. I remember that when then like they really were driving the cars, rather than when you're watching a sitcom like Seinfeld, and it's just like composited in.
Right. Yeah, and they did it like every scene you see in Homicide where you're seeing the 2 cops in the front of the car. They do in fact have somebody sitting in the back of the car with a camera and recording all that while they're driving the real cars.
Or Murder, She Wrote, where they would have like it's like so obviously like back projection or front actual projection, and it just looks so phony where it's like projected on. Yeah,
I saw Perfect Strangers a week or 2 ago where it was like they showed the raft from a distance. And it was obviously, footage of people out on a raft. And then when they showed them close up, the entire background was fake, and it was real obvious they weren't the same locations.
So, Andrew, did your friend watch it as well?
Yasmin, she's actually sick today, but she listened to some of it while I watched it, but she was kind of like laying down, not really paying attention. But
okay. Did you get to watch any of the other stuff that I sent?
No, I didn't. Actually, I need to download it on her computer. I tried to download the files on my phone, but I didn't get to see.
Right. Okay. Right. So.
Well,
Yeah.
if anybody needs a link to the next episode, I can just let me know because I can get a pretty good one, I think. So.
It looks like they're on YouTube now. I'd have to have a.
Yeah, the only thing bad about the YouTube ones is that sometimes either they have parts cut because, like, if there was a song on it, they're worried about like, getting copyright for the song, so they cut out the song, the part that has the song, or sometimes the quality, visually isn't good. Like, they'll be it'll be at a weird angle, or they've flipped the video or something like that. So they're not all the YouTube ones are that reliable, but the ones that I sent you from that Movies 123 site, those seem to be usually fairly good quality. So. And they're intact the whole episode.
So, Jeff, do you think there was anything in this episode that was like particularly struck you as like anything that was sort of like type related or a good example of type?
Well, I mean, not much other than just the usual. Like we always talk about how G is such a good example of an ESTJ. So, pretty much anything he's in, you see that demonstrated. So, and often that struggle he has between pleasing his bosses as well as sort of feeling responsible for the people that he's supervising as well.
Yeah, and here's a good example of like non-type factors where you've got the fact that you've got his black background and the fact that he's half Italian as well. And I've said before that I think it would be a great series if you could get a good actor to do like the story of the young Giardello, how he sort of raised through the ranks to become like the first black lieutenant. I think it was in Baltimore. I think that would be a very interesting series.
It could be, sure. I think I would only trust something like that if it was going to involve like Tom Fontana and David Simon, the guys that have worked on the show, with the character and stuff, and not new people.
Yeah, and if you could get like an actor, a young actor, as good as, as good as the guy, as good as Yaphet Kotto, because
that's not easy to find sometimes.
No, yes.
All right, well, this is a point in the video where normally Ben and I give our scores out of 10. So if you guys want to give that, you can. If you don't feel like it, that's fine too.
I'll give it about 6 because that's about 6.
I would say I haven't seen anything to go off of, but I thought maybe a 7. But I don't have anything to base that off of as far as other episodes. But.
I understand.
Yeah. I don't have anything to base it, so I'm not even gonna give. To me, I have to see at least another episode to have something to compare it to. So I can't even give a score.
Yeah. What I do, what I've told Ben before, is that when I'm rating anything, I just go on like overall enjoyment level, and I try not to actually compare it to others. But I've recently sort of had to when it came to Homicide, because now we've reviewed so many episodes that I'm like, I start to give something a score, then like. The one that I've rated the lowest of all the ones we've done, I gave a 6. And so I keep being tempted to give something a 6, and then I'm like, well, it was still better than that one. So, and so that's how I feel about this one too. And then I'd give this one a 7. In fact, I actually liked it better than last week's episode. So it's a slightly better 7 than last week's 7. But so anyway, that.
Yeah, I mean, there are some.
Average would be...
I mean, an episode I would highly recommend to you is the one, and Jeff can give me the name of it, is the one where you've got Frank Pemberton and Alfre Woodard going at it, and it was like very good, and it was about euthanasia, and it was some very good scenes between the two of them, and Alfre Woodard's character was like the intellectual equal of Frank. And they had some good scenes, and the ending was left open, and I think that is a very good episode. What was that one called, Jeff?
I think you're talking about Mercy.
Yeah. So if you look at that, that's sort of like Homicide at its best, and so it's like and then also there's one really early on with like the stuff with the Adina Watts case. What was that one called with trying to get the confession out of the guy?
3 Men and Adino is the one where the entire episode takes place in the box, basically, trying to get the confession. But
and there was good stuff between like the older guy and Frank, where the older guy is like bringing up some racial class things between him and Frank, and so that was quite interesting as well.
All right, so the good news, Ben, is I think that next week's episode, I think you might like quite a bit.
Oh, good.
You know, better than the last few, because you like ideas, and there's some brought up in next week's show.
Ooh.
It's one written by David Simon and directed by Clark Johnson.
Oh, and these other two fellas might like that as well.
It's called The 20% Solution.
Ooh.
So join us next week for that.
Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.